Before we begin, I would like to encourage everybody to follow us on Instagram or sign up to our website to know when new rugs are going to drop. Let's get into it. We're back with a new episode of Rug Talk, and we're kind of covering a lot of ground with this one. This rug recently sold. I sort of wanted to use it as a point of comparison in talking about a rug that, if you're hunting for rugs or are into antiques, is probably a type of rug that you will either come across or come to know very quickly, which is called the Hamadan. There is a town called Hamadan in a county called Hamadan in a province called Hamadan. For the ease of identification, most people will just end up calling a Hamadan that comes from the province, the entire province of Hamadan, just a Hamadan. Now you can get a little bit more granular, but generally speaking, it just becomes easier for people to say this rug is a Hamadan rather than one of the villages within Hamadan, with a few exceptions, one of which we're going to be talking about today. If you walk into an antique store and you're looking around at rugs or for rugs, there's a high likelihood that many of the rugs that you're going to come across are going to be Hamadans. Now, why is that? One of the main reasons is because Hamadan was a huge exporter of rugs to the Western world, to Europe and the Americas in the early and mid 20th centuries. And so because of that, North America and Europe sort of became inundated with varying levels of quality of Hamadan rugs. In the rug world, there's this sort of pre and post export mentality, I think, although you can find varying levels of quality of different Hamadans from the early and mid 20th century. Most of them are going to fall into this sort of, I don't want to say undesirable export category, but they are more workshop, they're more assembly line types of rugs, both in their design and their quality. So let's start off with a little bit of a game here. So we have two rugs here, both of which could technically be considered Hamadan, both of which fall under the large umbrella known as Hamadan rugs. So if you had to guess, which one of these is the newer rug? Which one of these is the older and which one of these is the newer? If you guessed this one as the younger rug, you would be correct. So how do we tell that? How do we know that this is from the mid 20th century and would fall actually into this sort of export category? The easiest way to tell right off the bat is with color, the dyes that are being used in this rug. Dyes in rugs and explaining specifically how to see certain dyes is kind of a difficult subject to talk about in video alone. You really have to get up close and look at different aspects of the color in most situations. Although I will say on this rug, there is a huge tell as to at least one of these dyes being synthetic. And we've talked about it before, and maybe you can guess what it is already, but it is this orange. This orange and other synthetic dyes like it would fall into the category of something looking electric. That's usually the adjective used when describing synthetic dyes. If something looks electric, if it pops out at you, then it's most likely, although not in all cases, going to be synthetic in nature. Now, I draw your attention to the orange because that is the easiest to see. Once you see this orange, you will never unsee it in rugs, and it is usually an indicator that the rug, it's probably from the 20th century. And not only is this bright, but if you were to look closely at this surrounding lighter white cream color, you would notice that some of this orange dye has actually bled into those whiter areas. The same goes for the red, which also is an indicator that the red is synthetic in nature. And just as a side note, although we can see that this red has bled into the white, letting us know that this is most likely a synthetic red, also taking into account the time in which it came from. Red dyes are some of the most difficult to tell just through looking at them, whether they're synthetic or not. It's just something to remember and an area to tread lightly if you're trying to determine whether something is a synthetic red or a natural red. But those are generally the things to look for when we want to identify the age of certain Hamadans. We want to look at color. We want to look at the cohesiveness of the design. And it's easy to do those things when we have something to compare it to, which is why I kind of wanted to do this video while we still have this rug. So let's move to this rug. This is also, generally speaking, considered a Hamadan, although we have a more granular definition of this type of rug, which is called a Mazleghan. Mazleghan rugs are woven within the province of Hamadan, although you can be a bit more specific in your definition of Mazleghan rugs than rather simply calling them a Hamadan rug. Mazleghan rugs are known for their striking design. They have this sort of lightning bolt and inverted lightning bolt, two medallions, and then these spandrels that are typically filled with these sort of circle shapes. This one not only has these circle shapes, but also has these sort of four-quadranted Turkish symbols. We can say that this Mazleghan is probably from the first quarter of the 20th century. Now, how do we tell that? Well, there are two basic ways that we can tell that this rug is younger than this rug. And it comes down to color and design. And it's pretty clear to see that when we have these compared side by side. The Mazleghan has this sort of more natural, earthy feel to the colors. We have this sort of brick red, this robin's egg, and ocean blue. There are even parts of this rug that have very faint hints of aubergine coloring, which is kind of unusual and also indicative of an earlier piece. Just very crisp quality to the design. Actually, both of these rugs use a bota motif. This Mazleghan on the main field we can see, and then this Hamadan in the Herati motif. And comparison side by side, we can see a much clearer, crisper weave on the Mazleghan than the usage on the Hamadan. So in both color and weave, the Mazleghan holds the quality. And it's totally possible that both of these rugs were made for export, but the clarity of the design and the usage of more natural dyes is clearer on the earlier piece than on the later one. And don't take this the wrong way, this is not an indictment of this rug. What we are doing here is simply looking at the general clues that we would use to date certain rugs. And it's a little bit skewed because the Mazleghan is sort of in its own design category, but it does fall under that Hamadan umbrella. So it behooves us to take a look at the later Hamadan with the Mazleghan. The last thing I want to draw attention to on the Mazleghan is the weave. On many Hamadans, there is this sort of uniformity to the weave, where very clear demarcation lines of the single weft can be seen. And when we look at the Mazleghan, and this Mazleghan specifically, that demarcation doesn't really exist. There is a rougher, more rudimentary style to the weave than that sort of factory line single weft. And this could be indicative of a few things. What it says to me is it has more of that village feel, that more organic feel. I don't know if this was necessarily considered a village rug, as it could have been for export, but that's just the vibe I get when I see rugs like this, when there is sort of that roughness to the weave compared to a uniformity to it. So what have we done here? Well, we've looked at a Hamadan from the mid-20th century and a Mazleghan from the broader Hamadan province from the early 20th century, and compared them and learned about how to tell the difference between their age, which really comes down to color and clarity in their weave. I hope this Unraveled has been enlightening. If you have any contentions or questions, you can leave them in the comments below. Please follow us on Instagram for more rug content. Sign up to our newsletter on our website to know when new rugs will drop before anybody else. And I'll see you in the next Unraveled.